For centuries, her name invoked a shudder of fear. Her image, a terrifying tableau of immense power, a monster's head with hair of snakes, eyes that turned men to stone, a face etched with horrifying dread. This is Medusa. She is a Gorgon, the ultimate symbol of ancient, insurmountable fear. But behind those eyes that freeze and the deadly serpents lies a far deeper story. This is a tale of sorrow, born from divine envy, a story of a maiden's beauty and injustice so profound it scarred her soul, forever altering a legend. Forget the monster you think you know. Forget the simple villain, because before the scales, before the sharp teeth, before the serpentine hair, there was Medusa, a woman. She was a maiden of astonishing beauty, a devout follower of a mighty goddess, and a pure, innocent soul caught in the cruel games of the gods. How did something so beautiful become so terrifying? What heinous act could transform a radiant priestess into a symbol of dread? The answers lie not in darkness, but in the blinding light of power, lust, envy, and the brutal shifts wrought by the gods. Prepare to look beyond the stony gaze and uncover Medusa's true, heart-wrenching story. Long, long ago, before mortals feared her gaze, Medusa was famed for her grace and beauty in the sun-drenched city of Athens. She was not born a monster, nor a goddess. She was human, of incredible beauty, with a radiance that seemed to capture the very light within her eyes. Her skin was like smooth, gleaming ivory, her lips the softest rose of the dawn sky, and her movements possessed a natural grace that turned every head. But most striking were her tresses, long and dark. It was said these locks could rival even the golden curls of the near-magical goddess Athena herself, a true gift of nature. It was whispered that her hair could even rival the golden locks of the goddess Athena herself. Though Medusa, in her humility, would never dare to think so. She considered her beauty merely a gift, not a source of pride or rivalry. But Medusa was not only beautiful, her soul was also special. She was naturally pure, quiet in her faith, and deeply reverent of the gods. From a young age, her heart gravitated towards the great power of the gods, especially Athena, the wise, fierce, and always virtuous goddess of wisdom, warfare, and crafts. Medusa decided to dedicate her life to Athena's service, taking rigorous vows as a priestess. This was no trivial choice, but a profound act of devotion to her faith. She entered the temple a maiden, dedicating her entire future to the strict rules of chastity and devotion Athena demanded of her priestesses. Within the hallowed walls of Athena's majestic temple, a sanctuary dedicated to purity, enlightenment, and the pursuit of knowledge, Medusa found her true calling, a sense of belonging and peace she cherished above all earthly accolades. Life in the temple was a rhythm of quiet devotion and meticulous ritual. Medusa's days began before dawn, as the first rays of light pierced through the high windows, illuminating intricate carvings and cool marble floors. She assisted the elder priestesses in preparing the temple for the day's prayers, lighting fresh incense that filled the air with sweet, woody aromas, and polishing the bronze offerings until they gleamed. Her voice, soft and melodious, often led the morning chants, its sound bringing solace and a sense of divine presence to all who heard it. She spent hours poring over ancient texts, absorbing sacred knowledge and reflecting on Athena's teachings of strategy, justice, and the importance of self-control. Her life had a gentle cadence, a profound meaning in every careful step and whispered prayer. She believed her unparalleled devotion would earn her the goddess's favor and protection. As a priestess, Medusa was a shining example of faith. Her movements were graceful as she tended to the sacred fires, ensuring they never flickered out, a constant symbol of Athena's vigilant presence. She embodied all the qualities Athena herself valued: discipline, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to purity, especially the sacred vow of virginity. Her beauty, far from being a distraction, seemed to enhance her devotion, making her a living testament to the goddess's divine power and the sanctity of her abode. She was immaculate, innocent, and utterly devoted to her chosen path. There was not a drop of malice or cunning in her heart, only a quiet strength born of faith and deep respect for the divine laws she upheld. She reveled in the peace of the temple, a place of refuge and healing, believing herself safe within its illuminated confines, under the protection of the very deity she served with such unmatched devotion. She envisioned a life dedicated to spiritual growth, free from the tumultuous passions of the outside world, a life of serene service under her divine patroness's benevolent gaze. It was her sanctuary, her destiny, and the sum of her aspirations. But even the holiest of places and the purest of hearts cannot escape the whims of the gods, especially when desire, envy, and unchecked power come into play. Her unparalleled beauty, once a gift, would soon become a horrifying curse. It attracted the unwanted attention of a powerful god, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform her from a revered maiden into a terrifying symbol of divine wrath. The peace she knew was fragile, a thin veil ready to be rent by a storm of epic proportions, a storm born not of nature, but of divine transgression. The sacred tranquility of Athena's temple, a place meant to shield its priestesses from the wild passions of the world, both mortal and divine, was on the brink of horrific destruction. Medusa, in her unwavering faith, continued her duties, unaware that her striking beauty, once a symbol of creation, had drawn the attention of one whose desires were as boundless as the ocean. Poseidon, the mighty god of the seas, earthquakes, and horses. His power was immense, his temper quick to ignite, and his desires rarely met refusal. He was known for his many liaisons, often taking what he wanted without regard for consequence, leaving chaos in his wake. Poseidon saw Medusa. Perhaps he glimpsed her during a rare outing from the temple, her dark hair catching the Greek sun as she offered prayers at a coastal shrine. Or perhaps his divine gaze penetrated the temple walls, drawn by her pure, unblemished beauty, which even to the gods was captivating and uniquely alluring. For a long time he watched her from afar. His interest festered into a potent, all-consuming lust. The fact that she was a priestess of Athena, sworn to chastity and under the protection of a rival goddess, only fueled his resolve. This was not mere desire. It was lust, mixed with defiance, a subtle mockery of Athena. He saw her as a prize to be won, a challenge to be overcome, a testament to his own boundless might, not a living, feeling individual with her own rights and sacred vows. The very act of entering Athena's temple with such intent was a deliberate affront to the goddess, a bold declaration of his disdain for her laws and sacred sanctuary. On one fateful day, driven by this irresistible desire and utter disregard for sanctity, Poseidon entered Athena's temple. The air within the sanctuary, usually serene and scented with lily and beeswax, suddenly thrummed with an unseen, unnatural tension, an almost suffocating pressure. This was no visit of worship or respect. It was an invasion, a violent breach of sacred protocol, a profound sacrilege against all the temple stood for. In the heart of the sacred space, meant for purity and untouched by anything impure, Poseidon encountered Medusa. She was alone, perhaps lost in prayer, her eyes closed in peaceful meditation, her soul reaching out to her goddess. Or perhaps she was tending to the temple's sacred fire, her back to the world, focused only on her duties. She was innocent, completely vulnerable, and utterly unprepared for the brute, overwhelming force of the god's attention, a presence that filled the sacred space with dark, primal energy. What followed was a horrifying act, a violation of all sacred rules and human understanding of good and evil, a distortion of the very fabric of divine and mortal order. Poseidon, the mighty ruler of the seas, assaulted Medusa within the sacred walls of Athena's temple. Her cries were muffled, barely audible, lost in the heavy silence of the sanctuary, swallowed by the sudden thunder of Poseidon's presence and the terrifying roar of untamed ocean might. Her desperate pleas went unanswered, heard only by cold stone and the silent, unmoving statues of the gods. Their faces remained impassive. Their power seemed absent in her moment of greatest need. The pure maiden, who had dedicated her life to virtue and service, was brutally defiled in the very place she felt safe. Her spiritual home, her sanctuary turned into a place of violation. Her innocence, her faith, and her body, all taken in an instant. The act was swift, devastating, leaving behind a whirlwind of dust, silence, and the shattered world of Medusa. Following Poseidon's brutal departure, a profound silence settled over the temple. But for Medusa, it was a crushing weight of utter devastation. Every part of her being screamed in silent horror. Her mind struggled to comprehend the betrayal of the sacred space, the violation of her body, and the crushing realization that her unparalleled devotion had tragically failed to protect her. The sanctuary that had been her life, her refuge, became her personal nightmare, a place of profound desecration rather than solace. A deep, Cold fear washed over her, a sense of irreversible contamination that would forever taint her perception of herself and the world. She felt utterly alone, abandoned by the very deities she had served so faithfully. The act itself was a monstrous violation not only of Medusa's personal freedom and purity but also of the sanctity of Athena's temple. It was a direct, unforgivable insult to the goddess herself, a brazen challenge to her domain and her strict rules of virginity, honor, and sacred trust. Medusa, the victim, was left broken, shamed, and deeply wounded by an experience that would forever scar her soul. The peace of her life was irrevocably shattered, replaced by a deep sense of sorrow and uncleanness, mingled with a nascent, bitter anger that simmered beneath her profound despair. She had been defiled, not by choice, but by force, and the shame, though not her burden, settled upon her like a heavy shroud, isolating her even from herself, making her feel alien in her own skin. News of the horrific event, this profound insult to Athena's temple and honor, quickly reached Olympus, the home of the gods. The Olympian Council, a gathering of the most powerful and often capricious deities, must have buzzed with scandal. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, was consumed by a burning rage. Her fury was intense, fueled by a mix of personal affront, indignation at the desecration of her sacred space, and the necessity to assert her authority within the often competitive hierarchy of the gods. However, in a cruel twist of divine justice, her wrath was not solely directed at Poseidon, the true perpetrator. Poseidon, as a powerful male god, was often deemed untouchable. His actions were perceived as merely divine behavior, even if destructive. The rules of Olympus, often arbitrary and self-serving, rarely held the most powerful gods fully accountable, especially when their transgressions were against mortals. Instead, Athena's anger, born from a blend of wounded pride, desecrated sacred space, and cold, even cruel, divine logic, fell upon Medusa. Why Medusa? This question has sparked debate for centuries, a point of deep moral discomfort and outrage within the myth. Some ancient accounts suggest Athena saw Medusa's beauty as the root of the problem, the allure that drew Poseidon's unwanted attention, as if the victim's very existence was to blame for the crime. This view, though harsh, underscores the unforgiving nature of divine judgment, where cause and effect are sometimes contorted for the sake of divine pride and convenience. Other interpretations argue that Athena, a goddess who prized her virginity and the purity of her domain above all else, could not tolerate the desecration of the sacred space. To her, Medusa's presence in the temple after such an act, even as an unwitting victim, somehow tainted the sanctity of the place. The honor of the temple, and Athena's own good name among the Olympians, seemed to matter more than the suffering of her devoted priestess. It was a cold and harsh judgment, devoid of empathy, focused solely on divine order, retribution, and the preservation of her own unblemished image. Thus, Medusa became the scapegoat, a visible punishment serving as a stark warning to all, while the true perpetrator, Poseidon, remained largely unpunished by the Olympian Council. His power remained unchallenged. So, Athena delivered her horrific judgment, a curse that would completely transform Medusa. This was not a punishment meant for Medusa's healing or for justice against Poseidon. Instead, it was crafted to isolate, to transform, and to serve as a living, terrifying warning. The curse began with Medusa's most celebrated feature, her hair, once a cascade of rich, dark locks, so famed for their beauty, they were whispered about throughout Athens and beyond. They began to writhe, to contort, to thicken and harden. Each strand transformed into a living, writhing snake. Their scales gleamed, their tiny forked tongues flickered. I dug into her shoulders, the sensation for Medusa, one of utter horror, nauseating, as her scalp became a nest of vipers, each a living reminder of her lost purity and the monstrosity she had become. Her radiant skin began to stretch and crack, hardening into rough reptilian scales, covering her entire body, making her feel alien in her own flesh. Every touch was a reminder of her altered state. Her graceful form became contorted and hunched, grotesque and inhuman. Her limbs stiffened. Her movements ceased to be fluid. Her beautiful eyes, once filled with purity and devotion, gained a terrifying power. Anyone who looked directly into them was instantly turned into cold, lifeless stone. The transformation was agonizing, a living nightmare that stole not only her beauty but her very humanity, replacing it with a horrifying, alien form. She was no longer Medusa the priestess, but a creature of terror, a walking curse, a monument to divine cruelty. It was a curse of unimaginable cruelty. Medusa, transformed from a maiden of captivating beauty into a repulsive monster, an outcast from human society, and condemned to a solitary existence. The very feature that had drawn Poseidon's attention, her hair, became a symbol of her monstrousness, a cruel irony that amplified her suffering. Her ability to see and be seen, to connect with others, was twisted into a deadly weapon, severing her from any form of human connection and dooming her to a life of enforced solitude. She became a living prison, a cursed being destined to repel or destroy anyone who dared to approach. She became a walking monument to the wrath of the gods, and a warning to mortals of the dangers of divine envy and capricious punishment. A tragic figure, caught in a cosmic power struggle. Her future was now one of utter loneliness, fear, and a bitter existence until her inevitable end. Following Athena's brutal curse, Medusa was ripped from everything she knew: the bright city of Athens, the sacred temple, the gentle caress of sunlight on her once soft hair. All was replaced by a grim, desolate existence. She was exiled to distant, rocky islands at the edge of the world, often described as the land of the Hyperboreans or a far-flung, windswept coast. It was a place of shadows and sharp stones, a fitting prison for a creature now considered a horror. Her transformation was not just external. It was a profound soul wound that would never heal. The bright, pure-hearted priestess was gone. In her place was a being consumed by deep sorrow and a constant, smoldering rage. Every glimpse of her reflection in still water, every writhing movement of the snakes that crowned her head, was a painful reminder of what she had lost. Her eyes, once soft and inviting, were now instruments of death, turning any living thing they met into cold, lifeless stone. This power, terrifying to others, was to Medusa a source of endless pain. It meant eternal solitude. She could never again look into a living face, never truly connect with another soul, for fear of turning them to dust. Her world became a blurry dance of peripheral shadows and shapes, as she constantly averted her gaze, trying to preserve what little she could see without destroying it. The constant internal struggle to control her gaze, to prevent accidental petrification, was a new, exhausting burden, a daily battle against her own nature. The change was complete. Her once smooth skin had become a rough, scaly hide, like a reptile's, sensitive to every shift in the air, constantly irritating. Her hands, once delicate in their priestly duties, now ended in sharp, bronze claws, alien and grotesque, and her magnificent dark hair, her greatest beauty, writhed and hissed, possessing a life of its own, each strand an independent, venomous snake. The sounds were maddening. The constant rustle of scales, the dry whispers of serpentine tongues, the feeling of their cold bodies against her scalp. The scent of ozone and fear seemed to cling to her like an invisible shroud, repelling all living things. Medusa was a living paradox, a victim yearning for release and yet a weapon forged to bring ultimate stillness. She often felt like a statue, trapped within this monstrous form, a prisoner of her own power. Medusa was not entirely alone, however, though her companions offered a peculiar form of solace. She had two sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Unlike Medusa, her sisters were immortal, born Gorgons from the ancient, monstrous lineage of the sea deities Phorcys and Ceto. They were monsters from the outset, a natural part of the world's ancient, untamed forces, with scaly skin, bronze claws, and serpentine hair. They shared Medusa's horrific visage but not her tragic past. They were fierce, powerful beings, immune to the curse that befell their mortal sister. While their presence offered some form of companionship, it also underscored Medusa's unique suffering. They were born into this monstrous state. She, however, was thrust into it, creating a painful contrast between natural form and forced transformation. Some myths suggest they were her loyal protectors, fiercely guarding her from unwanted visitors and sharing her bitter exile. Their roars and the clashing of their claws kept all away who dared approach. Others depict them as more stoic, accepting their monstrous nature and perhaps less burdened by the grief that consumed Medusa, as they had never known the world as beautiful mortals. Medusa herself felt a bitter kinship with them. They were kin, bound by blood and shared monstrosity. But their monstrosity was their birthright, while hers was a brutal violation. Their shared exile was a bond forged by fear. But the deep personal wound of her curse, the memory of her stolen innocence, was hers alone to bear. Life on the desolate island was a torturous, endless cycle of fear, despair, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Medusa wandered amongst the stone statues of those unlucky enough to stumble upon her lair, shipwrecked sailors, curious travelers, or unwitting beasts. These were not trophies, but grim monuments to her curse, silent witnesses to her isolation. Each petrified figure represented another life, accidentally extinguished, another connection, irrevocably severed. She lived with the agonizing awareness that her very existence was a threat, a danger to anything she might conceivably seek to approach. The whispers of the wind carried echoes of the pure life she once led, a stark contrast to the cold reality of her cursed existence. She yearned for an end, for release from the agonizing prison of her monstrous form, a longing for oblivion that became the constant undercurrent of her existence. Each sunrise was a fresh reminder of her living hell. The sun's rays, once a source of warmth in Athens, now merely highlighted the stark, silent figures of her victims, their stony eyes forever fixed on her in terror. She often wondered, in her isolated mind, what it was like to turn to stone. Was it a sudden fear, a flash of pain, or a slow, creeping cold that consumed the body and mind? Did they feel their lives drain away? Or was it an instantaneous, merciful void, a sudden cold peace? These grim thoughts were her only companions, alongside the unsettling rustle of her serpentine hair and the mournful cries of seabirds echoing across the desolate rocks. Her days were a monotonous cycle of hiding from the world, managing the immense power of her gaze, and grappling with the profound injustice of her fate. She was a weapon, forged by divine anger and cast into a world where her only purpose seemed to be to inspire terror and claim new victims. Her heart, once filled with devotion and purity, was now heavy with the burden of her curse, a weight no living creature should bear, a constant ache of what was and what could have been. While Medusa endured her wretched existence far across the seas, another story was unfolding, one that would ultimately lead to their fated encounter. This was the story of Perseus, a young hero whose life was already marked by prophecy and divine intervention. Perseus was the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and a mortal woman named Danae. His birth was accompanied by strange events, as an oracle had warned Danae's father, King Acrisius, that his own grandson would one day cause his death. Fearing this prophecy, Acrisius cruelly locked Danae and her infant son, Perseus, in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping to evade his fate. But destiny, guided by the gods, was not so easily escaped. The chest washed ashore safely on the island of Seriphos, where it was found by a kind fisherman named Dictys. Dictys took them in and raised Perseus as his own, giving him a safe and loving home. Perseus grew into a strong, brave young man, known for his kind nature and heroic spirit. He was unaware of his true divine parentage or the great destiny that awaited him. However, Dictys had a brother, King Polydectes, the ruler of Seriphos. Unlike his kind brother, Polydectes was a greedy and power-hungry king. He desired Danae for himself, but she continually rejected his advances. He saw Perseus as an obstacle to his plans, a sun protector standing in his way. Polydectes, unable to force Danae into marriage while Perseus was present, began to plot. He decided to get rid of Perseus through trickery. Polydectes announced he intended to marry another woman, Hippodamia, and summoned all the island's noblemen for a grand feast, asking each to bring a horse as a wedding gift. Perseus, being poor and having no horses, felt humiliated. He boldly declared that he would bring the king any gift he wished, no matter how dangerous or difficult. This was the opportunity Polydectes had been waiting for. With a sly smile, Polydectes looked at Perseus and said, "Then bring me the head of Medusa the Gorgon." This request was tantamount to a death sentence. Everyone knew the legends of Medusa, the monster whose gaze turned men to stone. No one had ever returned from her island. Polydectes believed Perseus would surely perish on such an impossible mission, leaving Danae vulnerable and free for him. Perseus, driven by youthful pride, a heroic spirit, and perhaps a deep, unspoken need to prove himself, accepted the deadly challenge without hesitation. He did not fully grasp the horror and impossibility of the task. He only knew he had made a promise to the king, and a hero must always keep his word, regardless of the cost. He set off on his journey alone, into the unknown, unaware that his path would cross with the solitary, sorrowful life of the cursed Gorgon. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever echo in Greek mythology. His audacious quest was not just for glory, but a desperate attempt to protect his mother, even if it meant facing a horror beyond human imagination. Perseus departed from Seriphos, feeling resolute and profoundly uncertain. He had promised to bring back Medusa's head, a task that seemed impossible for any mortal. But along the way, he discovered that the gods, though sometimes cruel, could be helpful to those they favored. Two mighty Olympians, Hermes and Athena, stepped forward to guide and equip him. Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, was the first to appear to Perseus. He was a wily god, known for his speed and intellect. Hermes lent Perseus his winged sandals, truly magical footwear that allowed the wearer to fly through the air with incredible speed and ease, like a bird. He also gave Perseus a special curved sword, a scimitar of tempered steel, strong enough to cut through anything, even the Gorgon's scales. Hermes warned Perseus about Medusa's dreadful gaze and told him he would need more than just a sword. Soon after, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, the very one who had cursed Medusa, also offered her assistance. Though her judgment of Medusa was harsh, Athena still valued skillful heroes in order. She gifted Perseus a highly polished bronze shield. This was no ordinary shield. Its surface was so bright and smooth, it functioned as a perfect mirror. Athena explained that this shield would be Perseus's most crucial tool. He must never look directly at Medusa, but instead use the reflection in the shield to guide his attack. This way, he could see her without turning to stone. But even with these mighty gifts, Perseus still needed to know Medusa's exact whereabouts, as her island was hidden from mortals. For this, Hermes told him, he must find the Graeae, also known as the Grey Sisters or the Old Ones. These were three ancient sisters, born old, who shared one eye and one tooth amongst them, passing it from one to another. The Graeae lived in a grim, dark place, far from human lands, and they guarded the knowledge of Medusa's lair. Perseus flew on his winged sandals, guided by the gods, until he reached the barren, mist-shrouded land of the Graeae. It was a place of despair and ancient dust. He found the three sisters huddled together, passing their single eye from one to another, muttering prophecies and secrets in their creaky voices. As one sister handed the eye to the next, Perseus, swift and cunning as Hermes, snatched it away in a flash. "Give me back my eye!" The Graeae shrieked. Blinded and helpless, Perseus held the eye tightly. "I will return it," he said in a firm voice, "but only if you show me the way to the island of the Gorgons and to those who possess the Helm of Darkness." The nymphs, as he knew, also guarded another vital artifact, Hades' helm, which rendered the wearer invisible. Cornered and desperate, the Graeae had no choice. They revealed the winding path to the island of the Gorgons and explained how to find the nymphs of the Stygian marshes, who possessed the Helm of Darkness and other magical items. Once they had given him all the information, Perseus, true to his word, returned their eye. Equipped with divine gifts and crucial knowledge, Perseus continued his journey, feeling more confident but also acutely aware of the immense danger that lay ahead. He now had the tools to overcome Medusa's petrifying gaze and approach her undetected. Meanwhile, on her rocky, solitary island, Medusa remained unaware of the hero fast approaching her, a hero armed not only with courage but with the very cunning and wisdom of the gods, who had condemned her to this wretched fate. Her long, agonizing existence was drawing to its inevitable, tragic end. The stage was set for a final confrontation, a clash between the destiny of a hero and the sorrow of a monster. With winged sandals on his feet and the Helm of Darkness on his head, Perseus became a phantom in the sky. Invisible and unheard, he flew relentlessly, following the Graeae's directions until he saw the barren, rocky shores of the Gorgon's island. From above, it looked like a graveyard, littered with the silent, stony figures of those who had dared to approach Medusa. There were petrified animals, brave warriors frozen mid-stride, and even unfortunate sailors, their faces forever etched in terror or surprise. It was a chilling warning, a testament to the deadly power that resided there. Perseus landed silently, using the Helm of Darkness to remain completely invisible. He moved cautiously across the desolate landscape, holding his bronze shield high. He kept his eyes locked on its gleaming surface, using it as a mirror to survey his surroundings. He could not risk even a fleeting glance at any of the Gorgons. The air on the island was heavy, filled with a sense of ancient grief and a strange hissing sound that told him the snakes were near. Soon he found the Gorgons. They were asleep, sprawled amongst the rocks. Their monstrous forms were a terrifying sight, even in reflection. Steno and Euryale, with their bronze claws and scaly bodies, slept soundly. But Medusa, even in sleep, carried a deeper sorrow. Her serpentine hair twitched suddenly, each snake a living extension of her torment. It was said that unlike her immortal sisters, Medusa was mortal. This meant she could be killed, and her death would finally bring her release. As Perseus approached, guided only by the distorted image in his shield, a wave of complex emotions washed over him. He was here to fulfill his mission, to protect his mother from a cruel king. But looking at the sleeping Gorgon, he couldn't help but feel a pang of something akin to pity. This creature, a monster to the world, was also a victim of divine cruelty, exiled and cursed for an injustice she had not committed. The snakes on her head seemed to writhe with silent, endless pain. Her face, even distorted by Athena's curse, still held hints of the beauty it once possessed, now obscured by scales and fangs. This was not merely a monster, but a broken soul. With a deep breath, Perseus crept closer. His winged sandals made no sound. He raised his curved scimitar. Its sharp blade glinted. He focused on Medusa's reflection in his shield, careful not to look directly at her. Athena's voice, or perhaps a sense of divine guidance, seemed to direct his hand, indicating precisely where to strike. It was a precise, swift movement, an act of both bravery and calculated strategy. The blade descended, severing bone and flesh, separating Medusa's monstrous head from her body. At this moment, something strange occurred. From the blood that gushed from Medusa's neck, two beings suddenly emerged. First, the winged horse Pegasus, a creature of pure white, with powerful wings beating the air. Then, a giant warrior, fully armed and holding a golden sword, named Chrysaor. These were Medusa's children with Poseidon, born from the very act of her violation, now freed by her death. Their sudden appearance was a startling spectacle, a brutal birth from a brutal end. Medusa's immortal sisters, Steno and Euryale, awoke with a deafening cry of rage and grief. They saw their sister, their only mortal relative, slain. They lunged at the unseen attacker. Their bronze claws tore through the air where Perseus had been, but he was protected by Hades' helm of darkness. Invisible, and now armed with Medusa's head, Perseus swiftly ascended on his winged sandals, evading the vengeful fury of the remaining Gorgons, leaving behind a scene of chaos and despair as the immortal sisters mourned their fallen, cursed sister. For Medusa, the long, bitter nightmare was finally over. Her suffering had reached its tragic conclusion, not with a thunderous roar, but with the quiet, swift precision of a hero's blade. With Medusa's severed head safely stowed in a special pouch gifted to him by the nymphs, Perseus left the desolate island of the Gorgons. His journey back was no less eventful than his journey there. Medusa's head, though severed from her body, still retained its horrifying power to turn the living into stone. It was a weapon of immense, dreadful might, and Perseus understood its danger as much as its utility. He knew he had to be exceedingly careful with it, keeping it hidden in the pouch, revealing it only in dire need. His first stop on the return journey was the land of the Hesperides, where he encountered the Titan Atlas, bearing the weight of the heavens on his shoulders. Atlas, weary from his endless burden, recognized Perseus as a hero and asked for help. Perhaps he sought a moment's respite, or perhaps he desired an end to his eternal toil. Perseus, seeing the Titan's immense suffering, decided to use Medusa's head to grant Atlas eternal rest. He revealed the Gorgon's head, and with one swift glance, Atlas was transformed into a colossal mountain range. His weary form became eternal pillars, for this was the first demonstration of the horrifying, yet strangely potent, effect of the severed head. From there, Perseus continued his flight over the vast seas. During this portion of his journey, he stumbled upon another scene of distress. Below, chained to a sharp cliff by the sea, was a beautiful maiden. This was Andromeda, the daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia of Ethiopia. Cassiopeia had boasted that her beauty surpassed that of the Nereids, the sea nymphs. This boast had angered Poseidon, who, in his characteristic fury, sent a monstrous sea creature, Cetus, to ravage the Ethiopian coast. An oracle declared that the only way to appease the sea god and save their land was to sacrifice Andromeda to Cetus. Perseus, ever the hero, was struck by Andromeda's plight and her incredible beauty. He fell instantly in love. He descended and struck a deal with King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. If he could defeat Cetus and save Andromeda, he would be allowed to marry her. In their desperation, the king and queen readily agreed. As Cetus rose from the waves, a monstrous beast with gaping jaws, Perseus flew into the sky. He used his winged sandals to circle the monster, dodging its attacks. Then, he produced Medusa's head. With a flash of its stony gaze, Cetus was transformed into a massive, lifeless rock, forever guarding the coastline, a terrifying reminder of the Gorgon's power and the hero's audacity. Having rescued Andromeda, Perseus married her in a grand ceremony. However, during the feast, Andromeda's uncle, Phineus, to whom her hand had been promised, burst in with an army, attempting to reclaim her by force. A fierce battle ensued. As Perseus realized he was outnumbered, he again revealed Medusa's head. As his enemies looked upon it, their faces contorted in shock and horror. They were instantly turned into a silent army of stone statues, forever frozen in their aggressive poses. Medusa's power, even in death, served as a grim tool of justice and protection for her slayer. Having fulfilled his promise to Polydectes and gained a bride, Perseus decided it was time to return to Seriphos. He knew the king's intentions had not been good, and he was ready to confront him. He returned with Andromeda by his side, carrying the terrifying, yet victorious, head of Medusa, the final act of his quest. And one last brutal use of Medusa's curse was yet to come. Her presence, even in the form of a severed head, continued to shape the destinies of mortals and gods alike. Perseus and Andromeda finally arrived back on the island of Seriphos, the place where Perseus had grown up and where his mother, Danae, was still in peril. He found the situation on the island had worsened considerably since he had left. King Polydectes, believing Perseus long dead, had become bolder and more aggressive in his attempts to force Danae to marry him. She had sought refuge at an altar of Athena, praying for protection, but Polydectes showed no respect for the sacred space or Danae's pleas. He was a tyrant, and his rule had become unbearable for the people of Seriphos. Dictys, Perseus's kind foster father, had also been forced into hiding by the king's cruelty. Perseus entered Polydectes' palace, a place now filled with the king's arrogant supporters and sycophants, who openly mocked him, assuming he had returned empty-handed and disgraced. As Perseus announced his return and introduced himself, Polydectes sneered. "So, the boy has returned, but where is the Gorgon's head you promised?" He taunted, refusing to believe Perseus had succeeded. He accused Perseus of lying, and even threatened to punish him and Danae. This was the moment Perseus had completed his perilous quest fought monsters, saved a princess, and now stood before the man who had tricked him into this deadly journey. He looked at Polydectes, a man consumed by greed and cruelty, and knew his reign of terror had to end. The tension in the hall was thick. The king's men drew their swords, ready to seize Perseus. "You demand a head," Perseus declared. His voice boomed through the hall, carrying a force and finality. "Then prepare to receive it." With a swift, decisive movement, Perseus drew Medusa's head from its pouch. He did not look at it himself, averting his gaze or using his shield as a mirror, but held it high for all to see. The power of the Gorgon's curse, even in death, was absolute. The moment King Polydectes, along with his entire court of arrogant nobles and guards, looked upon Medusa's horrifying face, their mocking laughter and cruel expressions froze instantly. A chilling silence descended, broken only by the faint hiss of snakes from the severed head. Stone began to creep up their bodies, turning flesh into cold, lifeless rock. Their eyes, wide with sudden dawning horror, became glassy and unmoving. Within seconds, the grand hall of the palace transformed into a silent, terrifying gallery of statues, monuments to the king's folly and Medusa's dreadful power. Polydectes, along with those who had supported his tyranny, was utterly annihilated, their bodies frozen in their final moments of arrogance and greed. With Polydectes and his corrupt court turned to stone, Seriphos was free. Perseus freed his mother, Danae, from her sanctuary and reunited with his foster father, Dictys. The people of Seriphos, grateful for their liberation from the cruel king, hailed Perseus as their savior, celebrating his courage and the justice he had brought. However, Perseus had no desire to rule. Instead, he made Dictys the new rightful king of Seriphos, a just and compassionate ruler who would bring peace back to the island. Having fulfilled his duty to his mother and his foster home, Perseus turned his attention to his next destiny. He could not forget the prophecy that still hung over his head, that he was fated to kill his grandfather, King Acrisius. Despite possessing the means to do so easily, Perseus did not wish to fulfill the grim prophecy through violence or intent. He loved his mother and did not want to cause her further pain by harming her father. He sought to avoid his fated destiny. He traveled to Argos, hoping to find his grandfather and perhaps reconcile with him, or at least avoid a fated encounter. But fate, as it always does, finds its way, even when mortals try to outrun it. During a sporting competition in Larissa, a grand event where heroes gathered to compete, Perseus was throwing a discus when, by a cruel twist of fate, his discus veered off course. It flew unexpectedly into the crowd, striking an old man and killing him instantly. This old man turned out to be none other than King Acrisius, who had come to Larissa to attend the games. Thus, the prophecy was fulfilled, not by design or malice, but by an inevitable, tragic accident. The weight of destiny, heavy and relentless, found its way, despite Perseus's best intentions, saddened by the accidental death of his grandfather, and now burdened by this unintentional act. Perseus felt he could not justly rule Argos, having caused the death of its king. To avoid further conflict or fatal repercussions, he exchanged kingdoms with his cousin Megapenthes, becoming the ruler of Tiryns. While Megapenthes took control of Argos, Perseus went on to found the city of Mycenae, a powerful and renowned city in ancient Greece that became a beacon of its time and enjoyed a long and prosperous reign with Andromeda by his side, forging a legacy as a great hero whose deeds were sung for generations. Throughout these adventures, Perseus carefully carried Medusa's head. Its power, though terrifying, was instrumental in his successes. Ultimately, in a final act of respect, or perhaps symbolic closure to his quest, he returned the Gorgon's head to its original donor, Athena. The goddess, ever strategic and never one to miss an opportunity to wield a potent tool, placed the terrifying head of Medusa upon her shield, her aegis, or at times, her breastplate. There, Medusa's visage continued to serve as a powerful symbol of protection for Athena and a weapon against her enemies, forever reminding all who saw it of divine power and the consequences of gazing upon forbidden horror. In a grim twist, the face of the defiled priestess became a tool for the goddess who had cursed her, an eternal emblem of victory built on profound tragedy. Medusa's physical body may have been destroyed, and her ancient story seemingly concluded with her head adorning the goddess's shield. However, her legend did not end there. In fact, her image echoed through millennia, evolving and deepening in meaning, becoming something more than just a horrifying monster. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of myth to adapt and reflect humanity's changing concerns. Throughout history, many fascinating variations and interpretations of her tale have been told, each adding a new layer to her complex figure. Here are some of the most compelling ways to interpret her story, revealing why she remains such a potent and relevant symbol even today. The core of Medusa's tragedy, and one of the most resonant modern interpretations, lies in her profound victimhood. She was not born a monster, but became one due to divine wrath. Her transformation was a direct consequence of an unspeakable act of violation committed against her by Poseidon within Athena's sacred sanctuary. This is not merely a side note to her myth. It is the catalyst that defines her monstrous existence and fuels the tragic nature of her legend. This version, popularized by the Roman poet Ovid in his Metamorphoses, contrasts with earlier Greek traditions where the Gorgons were simply primordial monsters, born of the sea deities Phorcys and Ceto, without the layer of human innocence and divine injustice. Ovid's narrative humanized Medusa, making her suffering central, and it is this version that has largely shaped her modern understanding. Imagine a young Medusa, innocent and utterly devoted, finding solace and purpose within Athena's temple. Her life was one of quiet ritual, contemplative prayer, and a deep, pure connection with her goddess. Each morning, the scent of incense and polished marble greeted her as she began her sacred duties. Her soft, unblemished hands carefully tended to the sacred fire, a symbol of Athena's ever-watchful wisdom. She believed herself safe, protected by her vows of chastity, and the sanctity of the hallowed ground she served. She envisioned a life of serene spiritual growth, far removed from the petty envies and brutal passions of the mortal world, let alone the gods. Then abruptly, this sanctuary was violated, her purity shattered by the overwhelming force of a powerful god's unchecked desire. The assault was not merely physical, it was a devastating attack on her spirit, her faith, and her very sense of self. The violation left her traumatized, a wound that would never heal, forever poisoning the wellspring of her memories and hopes. She was stripped of her free will, her choices, and her future in one brutal moment. Her screams drowned out by the echo of stone. But the injustice did not end there. The cruelest twist was Athena's judgment. Instead of offering solace, protection, or retribution against the true perpetrator, Athena punished Medusa, the victim. This divine reaction is often interpreted as a chilling reflection of the real world, where victims of horrific acts are blamed for the crimes committed against them, while the perpetrator often escapes consequences. Athena's reasoning, driven by indignant pride over her desecrated sanctuary, professional rivalry with Poseidon, who was known to have vied with her for the patronage of Athens, or a cold adherence to her strict laws of purity, fundamentally ignored Medusa's suffering. The goddess's choice to transform Medusa's most beautiful feature, her hair, into venomous snakes, and to make her gaze lethal was a symbolic annihilation of her former self, a permanent mark of her supposed sin. She was literally dehumanized, ostracized, and forced to bear the burden of a crime that was not hers. Her once radiant eyes, now instruments of death, became an eternal reminder of the moment her life was irrevocably ruined. This profound injustice resonates deeply within contemporary discussions of sexual violence, accountability, and the systemic failures in protecting victims. Medusa has become a powerful symbol for survivors of sexual assault, an empathetic icon that acknowledges their pain and the scars of trauma. Many women find strength and solidarity in her image, reinterpreting her not as a monster of pure evil, but as an emblem of resilience, acknowledging their own transformed selves and reclaiming power over their narrative. Her stony gaze, in this context, becomes a symbolic shield, a capacity to freeze or neutralize an aggressor, turning their harmful actions into inert, powerless monuments to their own transgressions. It's a way of saying, "You can no longer harm me. My pain has become my armor." This interpretation transforms Medusa from a figure of terror into one of profound empathy and a call for justice. The sorrow and rage she must have experienced, living as a cursed outcast, reflecting daily on the injustice of her fate, mirror the profound emotional wounds of those who have been wronged and then silenced, shamed, or even punished by society for their victimhood. Her story serves as a potent reminder that the true monster is often not the one with a terrifying visage, but the one who inflicts pain and injustice. While victimhood highlights Medusa's suffering, another, equally potent and increasingly relevant modern interpretation focuses on her transformation into a symbol of fierce, righteous feminine rage and formidable power. If her initial transformation was a devastating punishment, it also inadvertently granted her immense, irrefutable power. She became untouchable, unable to be looked upon, a force that commanded fear and demanded isolation. This narrative reframes her curse not just as a tragedy, but as a brutal awakening, a forced evolution into a being capable of immense, destructive self-preservation. Imagine the immense fury she must have harbored, simmering beneath her scaly skin and behind her petrifying eyes. Fury at Poseidon for his brutal predatory act, a violation that defiled her body and her spiritual home. Fury at Athena for the cruel and unjust punishment, transforming her into a monster instead of offering protection or vengeance. Fury at the entire Olympian pantheon for their capricious power and indifference to mortal suffering, and perhaps even a bitter fury at herself for her innocence, which made her vulnerable, for her beauty, which attracted such destructive attention. This was not petty anger, but a primal, elemental rage, a molten core of resentment born of profound betrayal, irreversible loss, and a stolen life. In this interpretation, Medusa's monstrosity is not merely a curse but a radical form of self-defense, an awe-inspiring transformation into a being capable of protecting herself when neither God nor mortal would. Her terrifying nature becomes an impenetrable shield, ensuring that no one can approach her with ill intent again without immediate, devastating consequences. Her petrifying gaze, thus, is not simply a curse. It is the ultimate boundary, a weapon forged from her pain, safeguarding her from further harm. It is the silent, yet thundering cry of a victim finally empowered to silence her tormentors, to turn their aggression back upon themselves, to demand that those who gaze upon her with malice cease to move. Her serpentine hair, once a symbol of her curse and repellent appearance, is powerfully re-envisioned as a crown of fierce, untamed primal power. Each writhing and hissing snake represents an aspect of her awakened fury, a visible manifestation of her potent, dangerous strength. This is a strength born not from delicate beauty, but from deep, ancient anger, a primal force that cannot be controlled or silenced by conventional means. Medusa, in this light, embodies the unleashed rage of a woman pushed to her limits, stripped of everything, and channeling her profound, burning pain into an unyielding force that demands respect and instills fear in those who dare to offend her. She is a reminder that even the most beautiful and innocent can be driven to monstrousness by profound injustice, and that within the rage born of such experiences lies a potent, albeit dark and dangerous, power. This interpretation inspires individuals, particularly women, to acknowledge and channel their righteous anger against the systems and individuals who oppress them, recognizing that anger, when channeled thoughtfully and strategically, can be a catalyst for change, a necessary defense, and a powerful assertion of self. It is a symbol of defiant survival, of turning scars into superpowers, and of refusing to be silenced or diminished. Medusa's eyes, undeniably central to her myth, hold a symbolism that extends far beyond mere petrification. They represent the immense, often dangerous, power of seeing and being seen, of perception and objectification, and ultimately, of control. This theme of the gaze is deeply woven into her narrative. Before her curse, Medusa's beautiful eyes and radiant appearance were objects of admiration, perhaps even envy. She was looked upon, desired, and ultimately chosen as a target because of what she represented to others: beauty, purity, and perhaps a subtle challenge to divine authority. As her beauty was said to rival Athena's, her original gaze, her human beauty, drew Poseidon's destructive attention, leading to her violation. In this sense, she was rendered an object of desire. Her physical form dominated her personhood, and this objectification directly led to her suffering. The act of looking upon her, in this context, was a precursor to invasion and harm. After her curse, her eyes become a terrifying inversion, an instrument of absolute destruction. Her gaze is no longer admired. It is feared, averted, and avoided at all costs. Anyone who dares to look upon her is instantly turned to stone, rendered immobile, powerless, and utterly lifeless. This transformative power underscores the destructive impact of how one is seen and judged. For Medusa, her eyes became an eternal prison, isolating her from all human connection. She could never truly look at her own reflection without seeing the monstrosity that defined her, reinforcing her trauma. She could not look upon her sisters without seeing their fear, or upon any living creature without condemning it to stone. This curse made her an eternal outcast, a living weapon whose very existence was a threat to all life. The burden of this power, the constant need to avert her gaze, a self-imposed blindness she endured to protect others, was a constant, agonizing ordeal, a living embodiment of her forced isolation from the world. Her world became a blurry, peripheral existence, seen only through reflections or fleeting glimpses, a stark contrast to the vibrant, engaged world she had once experienced as a priestess. This raises a haunting question. When external circumstances fundamentally alter who you are, when trauma reshapes your very form and existence, how much of your original self truly remains? Does the monster consume the maiden, or is the maiden forever trapped, suffering within the monstrous form, a prisoner of a curse that defines her against her will? This aspect of her myth explores the profound psychological impact of severe trauma. Just as the physical transformation was agonizing, so too was the internal shift equally devastating. She was forced to live with a new, horrifying power she never wanted, a power that condemned her to eternal isolation. Her former self vanished, replaced by a creature to be feared and hunted. But beneath the scales and the constant writhing of snakes, there must have remained a flicker of Medusa, a memory of warmth, of sunlight, of quiet devotion, of human connection. This tension between her former human self and her new monstrous identity makes her a profoundly tragic figure, forcing us to confront our own definitions of what it means to be human, and how easily those definitions can be shattered by forces beyond mortal control. Moreover, Medusa's transformation powerfully blurs the lines between human and monster. She was not born a monster. Unlike her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who were offspring of ancient monstrous deities, Medusa became one, a victim of circumstance and divine caprice. This fundamentally challenges the simplistic notion that monsters are inherently evil or born that way. Instead, it strongly suggests that sometimes, monsters are made by the very systems or actions designed to uphold order or justice. Her story compels us to ask, who is the monster? The one who bears the terrifying form, or the one whose actions create such a form? The victim of a curse, burdened by its consequences, or the one who enacts it, wielding power without compassion? This complex understanding evokes deep empathy for the monster and a critical gaze upon the forces that breed fear, alienation, and violence. Medusa becomes a potent symbol of monstrosity that can arise from profound, unresolved injustice, and a poignant reminder that appearances can deceive, masking immense suffering beneath a horrifying guise. Her legend compels us to look closer, to question who is truly monstrous, and to find humanity even in the most grotesque forms. Medusa's story is a tragedy, a stark example of how divine power can be wielded not for justice, but for bitter, undeserved punishment. She became a symbol of untamed horror, a creature hunted, though her true horror lay not in her monstrous form but in the profound pain and solitude that defined her existence. Her story, though distorted, still carries a chilling warning about the consequences of unchecked power, both divine and human, and the enduring scars of victimhood that can turn beauty into a beast. Her legend continues to live on, reinterpreted and reimagined through the ages. She is not merely a mythological figure but a mirror reflecting human fears, injustices, and struggles for power and identity. In her petrifying gaze, we see not only terror but a reflection of our own questions about how society judges, punishes, and redefines those who have suffered injustice. Medusa remains an eternal figure, her story prompting us to look deeper than the surface, to understand the pain, the rage, and the power that shape both monsters and heroes.